right, let's talk about the large intestine. So the large intestine is going to be about a half a liter of just stuff that the small intestine couldn't break down or process or do anything with. And hopefully you're healthy folks, you will have it be full of things like bacteria, mostly fiber from plants that you've eaten, leaves, cruciferous veggies and all that stuff. It still will have some nutrients and whatnot, but it wasn't accessible, right? Or it didn't have enough time to it, or it didn't have enough reagents to digest it properly. So it finally takes that material, and it really is just, its job is to dehydrate it down by about a fifth to a fifth of its size. And that generates feces, right? Your large intestine is about between like a meter and 2 meters long, depending on the individual, right? So there's that. They put the diameter in the cadaver because the cadaver is like not the same as a living individual. It's like possibly a little bit more relaxed or less relaxed, contracted. Sorry, I should say. It begins as the cecum, which is going to be right after the place where it meets with the small intestine. If you remember the ileal papilla, the appendix is kind of next door to that, which we'll look at again. We have the ascending colon, the right hepatic flexure, transverse colon, the splanchnic going up to the spleen, right flexure, a descending colon to the small intestine. The sigmoid colon is what is where it's S-shaped, and that's like the last part into the pelvic cavity. So let's take a look at this image. Let's start right here at ileal papilla, where it's connecting into the small intestine. Ileal papilla is going to drop the payload right into the large intestine. As you can see down here, inferior is going to be the appendix, theoretically holding a emergency microbial community in the event of diarrhea, severe diarrhea, to reestablish it. Is what, as far as we know at this point. Cecum is this little kind of landing zone. It's going to move up through the ascending colon. Each one of these little kind of bunchy looking nodules is the haustroms. Okay, they're going to go all the way up until we hit the transverse colon right here. So as you can kind of see, it just like dips a little bit. And then it's going to come down the descending colon. This is a pathology right here called a diverticulum. So have you ever heard of diverticulitis? It happens, most folks will get a colonoscopy like every year, every 2 years as they reach a certain age. And so there's these little bumps where we can detect things like colon cancer. And these little polyps or can get cut right out. Diverticulitis is a little bit more of like where it kind of invaginates, right? So it goes in, and these can get things caught in them. They can get inflamed. They can have some different problems. So when they become inflamed, it's diverticulitum or diverticulitis. Sorry, bad. The last part of the colon is known as the sigmoid colon because it kind of goes swoop like a little S. And it's going to connect right into this muscular structure known as the rectum. Right here, the rectum kind of goes from larger to smaller as it approaches the anal canal. And the anal sphincter is one of a set of sphincters that is going to control defecation or the release of feces, okay? I think, here it is. Okay, anal canal itself. So here's the rectum. There's valvular structures, anal canal, anal sinuses, which are detection points for things like gases versus solids, for example. Individuals that have hemorrhoids, right here, hemorrhoidal veins. So a hemorrhoid is when veins get pressure or they get distended on, whether it's like downward facing pressure. Pregnancy happens a lot, and they'll kind of pull out. They'll even actually get big enough to where they come out the anus or cause pain, can bleed, along with anal fissures. So here's an internal anal sphincter and an external anal sphincter, because we want to have some pretty tight control over what's coming out and when. So there's this. There's musculature, levator ani muscle, so that actually like closes it voluntarily, right, as well. So there's, yes, anal canal. The anatomy of the colon, for the most part, lots of intestinal crypts again, columnar epithelial cells, absorption, the intestinal gland, goblet cells, which are secreting mucus because it still has to move through. Excessive amounts of mucus means that it's an emergency response to remove whatever is in the intestine as fast as possible. So that's when you have, like we talked about lactose intolerance a little bit earlier in the lectures. So one of the features of lactose intolerance is excess mucus production in the intestine so that we can move out this offending like bacterial overgrowth and sugar that we can't digest rapidly. And some people can even get allergic to dairy components, and it kind of looks similar. So it's important to kind of distinguish what that is. Goblet cells pushing out the mucus, lamina propria, keeping, solidifying, and stabilizing the intestinal crypts all together. Within the lumen, muscularis mucosae, so muscles involuntary. Muscularis externa on the outside component, and in the middle are all of the arteries, veins, vasculature, lymph nodes, and lymphatic vessels that are going to carry away fats, absorbed materials, or support the cells that are inside working super hard. And it's all wrapped together at the bottom with the serosa itself. Okay, protective layer. Okay. Gut microbiome is important, and we didn't really realize it was super important until the last couple decades. It means that there's hundreds of species of microbes, bacteria, fungus, like lots of different things that are inside of your gut that are required for you to make all of the vitamins you need, digest the food you need to make. They further digest down elements that you cannot digest so that you can absorb those nutrients. The flatus is intestinal gas. This is the farts. Most people will make about a liter a day. Much of it is actually reabsorbed into the intestines. If there is too much, it's oftentimes a sign of microbial hyperactivity, not so much activity of the individual. So certain types of microbes flourish in different types of nutrient environments, so that would be maybe part of it. For example, it doesn't smell great, and that is due to things like the hydrogen sulfide, the indole. They produce the odors that people know. So hydrogen gas that's in the intestine might actually explode during the use of cauterization in surgery because of the exposure to the electrics. So things to be aware of should you go into that field. Large intestine is going to take about 2 days to take whatever it is you ate and get it processed, dehydrated, and moved out. Most of the time it's spent in that transverse colon that goes across the top component, right top part of your abdomen. And it doesn't really change it, it's just absorbing. That's all it's doing, and compacting. So of the solids of the feces, about 30% is bacteria. In a healthy individual, about 30% or more, hopefully more, is undigested fiber. And the rest is different things that we can't or didn't absorb, including mucus, proteins, salts, all kinds of stuff. Your own epithelial cells. Something to think about. There it is. Defecation. Defecation is the release and removal of feces. There are 2 reflexes to know about. There is an urge to defecate. So there's a response back up so you can actually feel it and are cognizant of it. Sometimes it's soon after a meal because it's like stimulated the gut motion altogether. Most of it is a reflex network. And it's a low-grade, weak response unless there is an emergency, such as that's going to result in diarrhea, right? Removing chemical irritants for the most part. Stretch signals are going to be what causes that feeling, the urge to go. Parasympathetic defecation and reflex involves the spinal cord itself. So again, stretch reflex. And it's going to start doing things like intensifying that movement feeling, peristalsis, the loading into the rectum, and then also the ability to relax the internal anal sphincter. So defecation occurs after it passes through the two sphincter doors, right? There's an internal and an external sphincter. However, you have control of one, and the involuntary nervous system has control of the other. So the external anal sphincter is under your voluntary control, hopefully, most of the time. We should talk again about Valsalva maneuver, right? We talked about that during respiration, the respiratory system. It's the pressure to push, right? And you can push to defecate. You can push during childbirth and labor. You can push when you're trying to breathe specifically. So that's that abdominal pressure that's going to compress the rectum. Right. And then here is what I'm going to leave you with. An image of defecation, because it is finished and we are finished. This is the neural control hooking up to the spinal cord, sending impulses from the cerebral cortex, the decision or voluntary component, as well as the sensory, right? The stretch reflex happening down here, those stretch receptors down here in green, sensing that it has arrived and it is time. Right, so the feces are going to stretch the rectum. The spinal reflex is going to kind of allow for that contraction and is going to relax that internal anal sphincter. So one door is open and you have to decide from the cerebral cortex to release that final external anal sphincter. Right, so those muscles being tight is important. I'm going to say Kegels, people, long into your ages. Okay, well, that's it for digestive system. And thanks lots.